So let's talk about strategy. What do you think when you think about strategy? What comes to mind? What do you think about? Sort of the broad strokes, the sort of the big picture, or something like that. Does your company have a strategy? Do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you?
And I think, and we work with companies in their strategy, and so I think both broad, long term, but I also think
Long term, yeah.
the steps to that long term plan. So
Plan.
the shorter term steps to the long term.
Well, and that's a good point. There's no long term without short term, right? So you can have these goals and visions and all these kind of things, but then you have to say, okay, how do we get from here to our aspirational, what we want to do? And that's part of it, is having a step-by-step. I always like to, I think of Boeing. Boeing has 5-year plans, and they are so granular that they have every day, they have what the steps they have to do that day to meet certain milestones and deliverables to get to those 5-year plans every day, so they can see, did we achieve what we had to do today? Did we achieve what we had to do today? Yeah. So right, that's kind of the with strategy is there's 2 parts to it, and sometimes you can break it down and say, well, the strategy might be the long-term kind of things, and then the shorter-term things, sometimes you call them tactics, right? Or these are the things we have to do. But they have to be aligned, right? They have to be together. So do you develop strategic plans with your clients, or do they come in with their plan?
Generally, a lot of the time it'll be a company that has a strategic plan, but they need obviously communications to fit into that.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of either working with them and developing it, or at least executing what they want to get done.
All right. So with strategy, with any company, there's 2 things we're trying to do with a company, right? You're trying to create value in some way, right? And then you're trying to protect yourself from competitors. So those are 2 things. You want value, and value is in the eyes of your customers, right? So you want to be able to communicate and market and all those kind of things. And then you don't want your customers to be buying someone else's thing, or what makes you different. So we have to have some sort of barriers to entry or competitive advantage, right? So it's your proposed value and your competitive advantage. How do you protect yourself from competitors? What makes you different? And that's really what we're doing in strategy, is to find out what is our value and what is our competitive advantage. And the competitive advantage has to be a sustainable competitive advantage, right? One that can last. Because there's lots of businesses you can go into and say, oh, this is a great business. I can, just put up a website and, for a couple $100 I can get going on. Well, then what makes it, if you start making money, what makes it so that like 100 other people don't come in and do the same kind of thing? Like, what is your secret sauce that makes you different? And sometimes they call it barriers to entry, like if there's some sort of barriers to entering that business, or competitive moats, sort of another sort of siege metaphor, castle metaphor. Warren Buffett uses that a lot, competitive moats. So it's something either building walls or building ditches, kind of thing. Something that is making it so other people can't just come in and take over your business. And then what is your value proposition and how you're communicating that to customers and getting that sort of product market fit, right, between your customers and what you're doing. And so when we're trying to do those kind of things, really there's strategy is you have your company, right? And you're operating, and so then you have all your internal type of things that you're trying to do, right? Your operations, your human resources, what core competencies you have as a company, and defining those, right? What do you do well, and how do you do it? And then you have this whole sort of, environment that you're working in, where you have competitors and substitute products and your customers and your suppliers and all those kind of different entities that are operating, on you. So you can say, this is what I'm going to do, and have that plan and start executing on that plan. But then the environment might change, right? In the environment, you have to be able to be responsive to the environment and be aware of the environment and be opportunistic so that you can seize opportunities as they become available. So when we're thinking about strategy, a lot of times people think about the strategic plan, right? The strategic plan, that's the document that you do. And there's a great quote it's attributed to Eisenhower, Churchill, or all different kinds of folks. Plans are useless, but planning is invaluable. It's not a document, it's not a static thing, it's a process, right? And the process is what we're interested in. And you can break down the process in a lot of different ways, but at the end of the day, what it is sort of an iterative process. And by iteration means it's sort of circular, right? You go through a number of steps, and then you come back and reevaluate and redo your plan, kind of thing. And there's a whole number of different frameworks for what kind of process you'd use to do strategy. But we can start with, and the way I'm going to teach it, I've written a book on strategy and thought about this a lot, what are the different steps and how the heck do you do them, and what are the, who's doing what. But it starts with some strategic thinking, right? Thought processes around strategy. And part of that is, and some people think of strategy as the vision and mission statement, right? Those kind of things. But that's not really enough, right? That's part of it, certainly, but that's not enough. Like you said, the vision and the mission, that's like, this is where we want to go. This is what we want to aspire to be. We want to be the best in our sector. We want to be, here or there. But then how do you get there, right? How do you get from here to there is the thing. So thinking about, all these different parts, there's the long-term kind of thinking. And part of that is also, especially in this day and age where technology is just so rapidly changing, and so the environment is so quickly changing. You even think of companies that are dominant and all of a sudden they run into some sort of, crises or something. And crisis management is a big part of public relations. Like think of Facebook now, right? They're really running into a big, especially in the United States. I don't know about in the rest of the world. I think to some degree they are, but that they've taken advantage of folks. They've taken the data and sold it or whatever they're doing to monetize and to make money, which is part of business, but then using people's information in ways. And then all of these, they're susceptible to all of these nefarious players and stuff. And suddenly, where they were thought of as like, all we're trying to do is connect the world, and we're all, kindly, techno wizards or whatever. Now they seem like sort of dark and sinister characters a little bit. And then how do you shift back to how does Mark Zuckerberg get his mojo back, or his or even Sheryl Sandberg now is coming under all kinds of scrutiny and criticism, where she was like this goddess of tech, and her book Lean In and all that kind of stuff, and now everybody's like, oh, but she's investigating George Soros and trying to undermine him and all these kind of things, so those reputations can just turn on a dime, and really monitoring and making sure that you're not out of touch with your customers and with the general public or with the regulators, because now they may go in and regulate and say, you're not just a unbiased platform, but you're a media company. We have to regulate you as such. There's all these kind of things that can come up that can be a real problematic for them. I don't know if you realize, but one of their competitors was, they had such a great social media platform, and I mean they're still amazing. They have like 2.2 billion users, and when you have that many users, we never had anything like that in the world, ever. That's more people than it's more than Christianity. I mean, it's more, it's really remarkable, and it's amazing that so any revenues that they get when you're talking about 1 billion people, it's giant revenues. So who tried to get in and compete with them was Google, right? And Google made Google Plus, right? And Google Plus was their social media platform where people could connect and do all that stuff. And they tried to make it a little bit better. And it seemed like they were going to do well because Google has, I think it's 8 products with over 1 billion users. I mean, really remarkable. Like Chrome, Search, Gmail, Android, there's YouTube, there's a whole, I think there's 8 of them. So it seemed like, well, with all those users that they could, add one more product and get people, jumpstart a really big social media network, social network. But it never took off, I tried it, never really worked for me. Either of you use, any of you use?
Yeah.
Google Plus?
Yeah.
Well, then you,
everything, though.
the what?
I try all of them.
Try all of them. Well, and what happened now is that Google abandoned Google Plus. In about the last maybe 6 weeks or so. They just, shuttered it. And so one thing is when you're using those platforms, you can build up a whole big, bunch of followers and use them and all, and then suddenly they change the rules of the game, and all that effort has gone for naught because they just blew your business model. But Google, anybody who put a lot of time and effort into generating a Google Plus community, suddenly whoosh, they pulled out the rug. And I wonder if they did that. One of the things, realizing that there were liabilities in that realm, and that they might come under scrutiny as like, there's all these Russian accounts, nudging elections this way or that way on your Google Plus site or all whatever else kind of things. So I think that may be one of the reasons why they pulled out of that arena. It's like, this may be, we have so many other franchises to protect. This is probably a place that, or maybe they just said, we're not able to compete with Facebook, so let them have that space. But that doesn't sound like Google. They have enough resources. If they wanted to, they could just keep, funding it and keep going. But that's basically, so that was a side example. But when you think about strategy is basically, can boil down to one word. Strategy is choice. It's about choices. Right, so that was a choice to either abandon that or stay with that type of thing. Does it fit into their strategic plan or not? And they may have looked and said, we don't want to go down that road where we're going to be called in front of Congress to have to, testify about why our social media platform has been abused by whomever. Right? Another thing with the platform of Facebook, and using those platforms is, I had built up a substantial network and was using it and putting out my stuff, and I'd have all this organic reach, and it would go out to all these people, and all of a sudden, that dropped off the face of the planet, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you have to pay now to get any kind of reach. Like, your article went out to 13 people. Like, what? So that's a danger of using these other platforms because they change the rules. Twitter's done it a number of times, change what the algorithms are, and closed off all these phony accounts, and like, oh my gosh, who even knew they were, just chatbot accounts and things. But it's about choice, and it's about choice because, and that's the hard part of strategy, is what are you going to choose to do? What do you want to do? What can you do with the capabilities that you have? And where do you want to play? Where is the field that you're going to go after? There's a whole school of strategy called Blue Ocean. There's a great book called Blue Ocean Strategy, and that's all about finding the places where nobody else is, and then you don't have competitors. So finding those market niches or something where no one else is competing, so you don't have to worry about a bunch of competitors. And they call it blue ocean strategy as opposed to red ocean, where there's blood in the water and then all the sharks come and compete. And so you want to be in a place where there's no competition. And there's a number of ways to set that up. Just being in a place that nobody knows about or has thought about before, or having patent protection or intellectual property where you actually have created a monopoly, and that gives you that kind of thing, that kind of competitive barrier for your blue ocean. But choice, when we talk about economics, right? In economics, the choices are, and it's the same thing with strategy. It's that you have to make choices in the face of scarce resources. Resources aren't infinite, and so you have to make choices about how to deploy the resources you have in the most efficient and effective way, right? So in economics, we look at, here's our budget boundary, right? And we can either buy this much of product A or this much of product B, but we can't go beyond that. We can make, we can buy some mix of the two. This is sort of the abstraction that they use in economics and microeconomics. And then you have your, everybody, different people have different preference curves, and that means where they prefer A to B or what their bundle of goods are. And wherever these two touch, the preference curve and the budget line, that's the most optimal for that person. That's the most optimal mix of the two products. And then you can aggregate that up to every product. And it kind of makes sense. As we go in a store, we look around and we say, I could either buy that or that. I could go on vacation, or I could buy the new car. I could buy a new refrigerator, or could, whatever, go on vacation. So we're always making those kind of decisions. And that goes all the way for governments, right? They call it guns and butter. How much are you going to spend on military, and how much are you going to spend on social programs for your people? We're always making these kind of decisions. Companies are making these decisions all the time, right? What are the resources at our disposal? How much money do we have? What revenues are coming in to do things? What human resources, core competencies do we have? And so we have these sort of constraints in a company, and so we have to make choices, and they have to be hard choices. Those are hard choices. A lot of companies, the big buzzword in startups is emergent strategy, where it's like, we're not going to worry about strategy. We're just going to plow forward, and then we'll figure out strategy as we go, and we'll just it'll emerge. It'll reveal itself to us as we go. Which, yes, you have to be aware of of what is happening and where the opportunities lie. But if you're just going and experimenting with no strategy in place to guide you with guardrails, and then all your efforts can get diffuse, and then nothing happens. So it has to be a balance between the two. You start just like planning. Plans are useless, and planning is invaluable. A famous Prussian general said that no battle plan survives the first contact with the enemy. Right? Because as soon as you have your plan, okay, we're going to put these guys this way, that, all of a sudden the battle starts, and all that kind of goes out the window, and you're running. But you had a plan, and Mike Tyson said the same thing about in boxing. He said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So he said it a little bit coarser, but same kind of thing, right? When you're reacting to the environment, you have a plan, and then you have to adjust your plan. But you need a plan nonetheless to start with. And especially as you get into an organization, right? You want to have a strategic plan that says, here's what we want to do, and then here's where we want to play, right? This is what, the blue ocean or whatever, the markets that we want to be in, and then here's how we're gonna win, right? Because that's what it's about. It's about actually succeeding in those places. And so you have these, and out of this type of planning process falls decision-making rules, right? And so you have guardrails, and you have some sort of area in which you want to compete and do things, but they're like guardrails is a kind of a good analogy or metaphor, because then within that you can experiment, but you're actually in service to where you want to go. And really, the only legitimate work in an organization is work that serves the strategy. And so you have to have clear decision-making rules that tell lower managers and employees and things, go and be creative, figure out what to do, how to do it, and make decisions, but make them with these kind of guidelines in mind. Herb Keller, who started Southwest Airlines, they had a couple of brilliant strategies. One was instead, like a blue ocean thing, they didn't go and optimize and compete where everybody else is competing, because everybody else had these hub and spoke networks, right? We have like Delta, their hub is Atlanta, and everything feeds into there and goes back out. And all airlines had that. So then it became one way that you can erroneously think about strategy is optimizing the current best practices or the best way to do it, optimizing that and competing and maybe incrementally doing a little bit better than anybody else. Well, what they did was they decided to do a point-to-point system and forget about the hub kind of thing. They had a hub at Love Airfield, but their whole thing was about point-to-point. So they shifted the competitive landscape, and then that gave them a place where they could operate with no competition, basically. And it really worked for them successfully. The other thing was they had decision-making rules. One of their major things was, we want to be the low-cost provider. And so to be the low-cost provider, they had to cut costs so that they could pass on those cost savings to their customers. So they could, their whole thing was, we want to be, our value proposition is going to be cheap airlines, right? Cheap air flights. So at one point, just an example, one of the, bright people said, what, we really should start providing meals, on the airline, because everybody wants to eat and it's really good, especially on longer flights and all. And then he just said, well, is that in line with us being the low-cost provider? And they had to say no. So then, no, we don't do that. That's a choice, and that's a hard choice. Sure, there's hundreds of things that may be opportunities to go after, or things that people might like. But if they don't fit in with your decision-making rules and your strategic plan, where you want to go and how you want to be there, what your value proposition is, then you have to make the hard choice and say, that's not for us. Even though it might be valuable in another setting, you have to really define those things and go. And this stuff is hard. The thinking part is really hard, because when you're in a company, right, there's just so much day-to-day stuff and everything's coming at you, and to be able to take time to actually say, we're going to go through a thought process and find out where we want to be, how we want to do it, all those kind of things, evaluate really realistically what we can do, and then we're going to do the thinking process. So then from the thinking process, once you have all the thoughts and everything, then you do the planning, right? And the planning is actually where people all sit down and get together, and usually it's a retreat, right? Like an annual retreat. You're nodding. Is that, yeah? You've done those kind of things?
Done a couple of them.
Mm-hmm. And they can be fun, and there's formats for putting those together. Did you follow some sort of a process where, like brainstorming and then voting on that and codifying it together, and looking at, did you have a plan that was already, was it no plan before that, or were you evaluating the performance of a previous plan and iterating on that?
A mixture of both.
Mm-hmm.
It was one that comes to mind is a nonprofit organization that I worked with, and it was really the formation of a complete new plan.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, they've been around for a long time, so kind of pulling in. Mm-hmm.
And so did they realize, like, we've got to like step back and see who we are and come up with some kind of strategic plan? Or?
I think so, but much more, just thinking for the future and
mm-hmm.
Kind of staying.
And did you have that at the bank and things, or?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And was it communicated pretty well? Like, what what our plan is, what we want to do, and
Yeah.
in like a mission statement or something? Or?
Yeah, the bank is kind of different a little bit, but it's basically almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And how you compete against other banks, like what makes your bank different, more tellers, faster lines, more interest rate on your, money, things like that. And all those kind of things can work. Goldman Sachs has just introduced, they want to get into retail banking. They've been an investment bank. And so they have a retail bank division called Marcus. And I don't know why they called it that, because it's kind of an odd name. But they call it Marcus.
They didn't want anybody to call it Goldman Sachs.
They didn't want to call it Goldman Sachs.
Assuming.
And so they're branding this thing Marcus. And but one of the great things they have is that they are giving, I think it's 3% or something like that on your savings. They have no, and the part of their strategy too is they have no branches. It's all electronic banking. And on your savings, you get 3%. Whereas these other banks that have branches and tellers and all that kind of stuff, and your savings account, you get like about this much interest, right? So they're actually giving you more on your money, but they don't have all of that bricks and mortar. So that's how they're saving, and they're delivering it via just electronic banking, which people are more comfortable with these days, it seems. A lot of banks, still tell me, oh, you know what, our people really want tellers. They want to come in and see a person and all that. It's like, most of my banking I do online. I even take photos of checks and stuff, or I have things electronically deposited, and like UNM here, they just pay me. It just goes right into my, my checking account, and then I can pay my bills. I do that all electronically or with my card, and I rarely go to the bank. So that kind of banking, kind of makes sense. The electronic banking like that with a debit card, because it's sort of like a credit card, and you're getting 3% on your money. It's like, wow. Pretty good deal. So that's their strategy of how they're going to compete and differentiate themselves. It's about differentiating too. The thing about strategy is it pulls on all these different aspects, right, of your business. Like how can you reduce your costs? How can you increase your revenues? How can you enhance your brand, your image? How can you reach customers through new distribution channels? What kind of value propositions? What kind of products and services are we going to deliver? All those kind of things that make up a business really get thought of in this kind of process. So you do the planning, right? And usually that's a lot of people getting together, not a lot, but the top people, and talking and discussing about what's been working, what's not been working, maybe what we should do, what are we doing now that we shouldn't do anymore? What are we not doing that we should do? What are we doing that we should do differently or better? All those kind of things. And then coming to some sort of consensus about that, right? And usually people are going to have different ideas about that. Like, we should go into this business, or we should do this, or we should do that. And that's what you're trying to do in the strategic planning process, is get everybody on the same page so people aren't going off in all different directions and saying, this is what we should be doing, that's what we should be doing, and diffusing, diluting the efforts of the company. So a lot of it has to do with negotiations too, right? Because some people are going to end up a little bit dissatisfied. So you have to come up with some kind of compromise or consensus so that everybody's on board that, yes, this is the direction we're going to take, and this seems like the most fruitful direction in the face of our budget constraints, Because some company might say, like Walmart, right? Walmart suddenly wants to compete with Amazon. It's like, we're going to make a whole online, retail and compete head-to-head with Amazon. Well, it's not that easy, right? And so do you have the competencies for that? Do you have all the web developers and all the artificial intelligence people to, understand? Do you have the computer people to create a search function so they can search for the products they want and then get all that data and tell them to buy other things, and have predictive engines that say, well, if you bought this, you might like this too, and all of those kind of things to sort of redo the pricing and all. It turns out that that's a lot harder than Walmart thought, and they haven't been able to really do that yet. And so they're competing with their bricks and mortar stores with Amazon, and then Amazon is at a disadvantage for sort of fulfillment, what they call fulfillment. You know, that once you buy the stuff online, you got to wait 2 days or 5 days, or if you want to try on clothes, you can't really try it on. All those kind of things that you can do in a real physical store. That's their drawback. So, what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to, and how quickly can they fulfill? How quickly can they bring the merchandise to us? And that's why one of the reasons they bought Whole Foods was that they can now use Whole Foods not just as grocery stores, but those are all mini warehouse and distribution centers in prime neighborhoods. That's one of the reasons they did it. It brought all to these really relatively good neighborhoods because Whole Foods went through and picked out those locations, those sites, thinking, okay, these are great places for us to be. And now Amazon can use those as distribution centers. And Amazon's also making their Amazon Go stores, which are bricks and mortar stores, but they don't have any cashiers or anything. You just you have Apple Pay or whatever on your phone. As you walk in, it notices that you have that, and then you get your groceries or whatever, and you go, and that's it. It just takes the money out of your account, and you don't have to wait in line or any of that kind of stuff. So they're trying to figure out new ways to deal with that. There's been a lot of talk recently that they may acquire Target, because Target would give them these great stores and these great locations, and then they'd have this brick and mortar thing. So as one company's trying to migrate onto the e-commerce thing to compete, the other company is migrating into bricks and mortars to compete. So it's all part of strategy. So then you have your plan, right? And then here comes the hard part, right? Implementing the strategy. A lot of times what companies do is they go through and they have this retreat, and it turns into a big drinking fest or whatever, and then you make the plan, and you have this big plan, and then it goes on the shelf and nobody ever thinks about it again, And that's the problem. You actually have to execute, you have to implement the plan, and so you have to have this linkage between strategy and tactics, like you'd said, learn you have to have short-term kind of goals, and you have to have short-term kind of progress, and in order to have long-term progress. So execution is really the hard part. And when you think about that, and it's a hard part in anything. I mean, in startups, a lot of people naively say, well, I can't really tell my idea because somebody's going to steal my idea. My idea is so great. It's like people have a million ideas. A million ideas are a dime a dozen. It's the execution that really matters. And actually, how many companies had the same idea as another one, and what it came down to was superior implementation, a superior execution, So you plan the work and then you work the plan, kind of thing. So when we think about these kind of things, another part of vision and long-term kind of thinking is, especially in this day and age, is taking into account technology and where technology is going to go. And what things are going to, so you're looking out and scanning the horizon, right? In this phase especially, you're scanning the horizon, looking what's out there, looking at what kind of different technologies might converge and make some, other fantastic thing, where technologies are going to, go on the curve of their development, and suddenly, what you couldn't do 2 years ago, now you can do because speed or inexpensiveness or whatever of computer, processing has gone up. So, and once any field gets a computer component, suddenly you're on these exponential curves where the development's happening so rapidly. So that's a lot of it, is looking out and saying what's going to come together. Where do we want to be in 2 years to take advantage of these, the futuristic or predictions of where technology is going to be? Not really developing for what we're doing now, but developing for what things are going to look like in 2, 3, or 4, 5 years, right? So that part a lot of times is considered the purview of leaders, right, or leadership. You know, that's the people that are doing the vision, scanning the horizon, figuring out what's going to be coming up, what our competitors might be doing, and a big part of this too is what they call having peripheral vision. Not just vision straight ahead of who are our competitors now, where are things going to go, but who could possibly be a competitor coming out of left field that we're not even thinking about now that can come in and undermine our business. I don't know if you saw, but today, Mattel and Hasbro, they're two big toy companies, their stock dropped like 6 to 10% today because Amazon announced they're having their own toy division come out. Whenever that happens in any business that Amazon gets into, the stock of the other ones could just tank because people are like, oh no, it's no longer as valuable because they're going to come in. And that's what's happened with a lot of branding, right? Amazon has a lot of generic brands now, and they're competing with established brands that have put billions of dollars into creating their brand, only to have Amazon come out with a product that's very similar and is cheaper, you know, and they can deliver it right away, and they'll even do it at sort of cost to start getting market share in that business. So you have everything from, you know, all the Procter & Gamble brands like Pampers and Tide and all those kind of things, and sodas or whatever, you know, clothing lines, everything. Even haute couture, you know, high line fashion they started getting to, and it really impacted the fashion business. So you have to start thinking about that. Where are these companies going to come from the sides? You think about the big automotive companies, right? No one could compete with them. Who could make a car on that kind of scale? It was barriers to entry, right? No one could get in because it would cost so much and nobody could do it. And then all of a sudden this upstart Tesla comes along, and at first they were stumbling, and then Elon Musk came in and he just like has driven that company, and suddenly now they're a real competitor. They sold more cars this quarter. In November, they outsold all the other car manufacturers in the United States, and that's including Mercedes and BMW and, you know, Lexus and Nissan and, you know, and of course the, you know, GM and Ford, and to the point where Ford and GM have just said we're getting out of those businesses, right? GM just closed like 3 factories, you know, 3 big plants, and laid off a bunch of people, and they're saying now we're just going to make trucks and SUVs, and we're going to give up the sedan business because nobody wants sedans. So they're going for these big gas guzzling cars, and they'll by the time they retool and get into that business, it might be 2-3 years from now, and maybe there'll be a spike in gas prices, and then everybody will be getting away from those cars and going to electric cars, and, you know, or high mileage cars, and they'll be behind the curve again. So that's a company that came out of, you know, totally out of left field. I mean, it just emerged and is eating all their lunch. You know, Porsche just came out and said it's remarkable what Tesla has done, you know, in making electric cars. No one else has done it. And think of their barriers to entry, where they've put in all those recharging stations all across North America and Europe. So Audi or Porsche or whoever is going to come out with an electric car, they don't have that charging infrastructure in place. So how are they going to, you know, maybe Tesla will rent it to them at some kind of premium so they can have that, but they'll have to go back through and put in all that infrastructure. So there's a big barrier to entry that Tesla has made, you know. So you were thinking about with technology that this kind of vision of what is, you know, where technology is going. This kind of curve, it's called an exponential curve, and in computers, it's basically been, you know, the processing power or the capacity of memory or the price. All those things have been rapidly either accelerating or diminishing, you know, price-wise, and that it's based on it's called Moore's law. There's a guy named Gordon Moore, and he was one of the two. Him and Robert Noyce were the guys that founded Intel. And Gordon Moore said back in 1965, he did a paper. It said that we predict, as we're, you know, putting more and more silicon, more and more transistors onto semiconductors, that every 12 to 18 months we're doubling the amount of transistors we can put on a piece of silicon, and we predict that trend is going to last for this, the foreseeable future. Well, it's called Moore's Law now because it has happened for the last 50 years. And when you're doubling, that quickly, you're just ramping up these incredible exponential curves as far as what you can do. And now that's why we can see now everything is, cloud computing and the buying capacity and computer, power. If you go through Amazon Web Services, AWS is a big division of Amazon. They are the infrastructure for the web now. You can go on there and get as much computing power as you want for relatively no cost, and you don't have to rack up your own servers or do any of that stuff to start a company. You can just rent some computer capacity through Amazon Web Services, start your company, and as it grows, you can expand as quickly as you want and scale it up using that service. And now other ones are trying to catch up. Google has a service, Microsoft is called Azure, but Amazon snuck in there and dominates that world. It's incredible. And it's all, so any, healthcare, any type of, genomics and those kind of things, the mapping a genome now has gotten from $1 billion, 10 years ago, now down to about $100 because the computing power has gotten so ridiculously cheap and ubiquitous. So there's those kind of things that you're thinking of on the thinking side, right? This changing environment, how are we going to position ourselves? What are our competitors doing? Who could be, competitors? That's sort of the purview of leadership we always think of, basically, right? This part here, when we get into execution, what is that sort of the purview of a lot? The other side of the coin, basically. Management. Management and leadership go hand in hand, and management is really about this part, right? How do you actually execute on that plan? How do you make things happen? So then the other part of this that closes the loop, kind of, is measurement, feedback, right? Because that's how we learn. We do something, we see how it works, and then we course correct, right? We iterate. We go, and then we replan, and then we see how our revisions work, and we, double down on what's really working, and we sort of either fix or discard what ain't working, right? So this is how an organization can learn and go forward with strategy. Is you can really you pretty much start with anything, right, in a way, if you have a tightly coupled feedback loop, and you do this relatively quickly, and when you realize something's not working, you don't try to hold on to it because it's your dear vision or something. You have to be relatively ruthless and dispassionate about, well, that didn't work, let's try this, or something like that. And have contingency plans built in and different ways you're going to go. But that you actually measure, so you get some kind of feedback, and that closes the loop, kind of. And then you start, rinse and repeat, right? You start the process all over again. So it's a continual thing, and that's basically what that saying is, plans are useless, planning is invaluable. The plan is just a document, and it's an organic document at that, but it's just one sort of, snapshot of what we're doing in this kind of process. And it gives us something to actually measure against, because going through the discipline of writing it down does two things. First of all, it makes you clearly articulate what the heck you're doing, and that's important. And the other thing is, as you go forward, it gives you something to measure against, because it's really interesting, journaling or keeping a diary or keeping notes, a lot of times as we go forward, we revise the past. And so we thought, I was always thinking that way. And if you have something that says, no, you weren't, this is the way you thought 6 months ago, it's like, wow, that was, kind of wrong. So having a plan actually gives you that type of a retrospective benchmark too, to sort of look at and say, okay, here's our thinking. That's why, we need to change it a little bit. Otherwise, you get into this loop of like, well, of course we were always thinking this way, while you're really drifting, Make sense? That's kind of And there's a great saying on the measurement side, Peter Drucker was a great, the management guru guy, what gets measured gets managed. So identifying what you're going to measure, what measurement metrics are going to define success is really important, right? And so there's all these different ones. KPIs, anybody ever hear of those kind of things? KPIs, key performance indicators, other kind of metrics. People make dashboards where they'll have things, but you have to say, is it going to be sales? Is it going to be revenue? Is it going to be, what type of cost reduction metrics are we going to look at? All those kind of things, because what you're trying to do ultimately is increase your sales and reduce your expenses, right? So that more money falls to that bottom line. So, that's basically the part of this is like accounting or finance, right? There's revenues, there's expenses, and there's net income, right? And what you're trying to do is increase this, and there's two ways to do that. You can increase the revenues, more sales, whatever, and you can reduce your expenses. And both of those will add to the bottom line. So at the end of the day, all of your metrics and all of this whole process is tied to this, because it's all about performance, right? It's all about winning, dominating your market in some way. So what do you think? You have any companies you like or interested that you can think of as examples of somebody who's doing something right or somebody who's doing something wrong, or in the world of business? What kind of phone do you have?
Mine is iPhone.
It's an iPhone.
Yeah.
Okay, mine's an iPhone too. How about you? iPhone?
Yes.
And why do we have iPhones? Why do you have iPhones? Have you tried other ones before? Tried them and they were like not that good? Like some kind of Android-based phone or something like that, like a Samsung or yeah. Apple is a great company. And they really do a lot of things very well when you start thinking about strategically. They had a couple of incredible game-changing devices that it's been a remarkable run for them. When you think about Steve Jobs, started with them. It was his company. And then he encouraged and brought on this guy, Scully, that was a senior VP of Pepsi, who really knew marketing from Pepsi, right? And they were going to market that way. And then it ended up that the board kicked Steve Jobs out. Can you imagine? It's your company, you started it, and now, wait a minute, you can't kick me out, but they could. And they did. And then he started Pixar and Next Computers. And then when Apple really stumbled, they brought him back in. He started to, revive the company in different ways. And then what was their first big product? Do you remember what he did?
It was an iPod.
The iPod, yeah. Yeah, he went into the music world. Who would have thought? And that was the whole thing. You can have a whole music library in your pocket, And that was all about convenience, and really remarkable that they were able to do that. And also at that time, what had happened in the 1990s was there was a thing called Napster, and there was all these peer-to-peer sharing of music where you could rip a file from your CD, make it into an MP3 file on your computer, and share it with everybody. And suddenly, the business model for the music industry went completely bonkers. It went down the tubes. There was no why would you buy music if you could share all this music and get it on your computer and listen to it that way? And the MP3 was a file that, for the capacity of the computers of the time, they tried to think of what is the most compressed file we can make of music that'll give the most information of the music, but not all of the signal fidelity of, say, a CD or a record, a vinyl or something like that. And the MP3 was sort of a compromise. It was like, okay, it's not, doesn't have all the high end or the bass notes, but in the middle it gives you, so you can listen to it and you can hear everything and it makes sense. Sort of like what you hear over a telephone almost, like just enough so the information is intact. Really fascinating, and that came up, and then who knew if that was really going to take, but we really all traded fidelity for convenience. Before that, when I was growing up, your stereo was like, defined you, and everybody had components. You'd have your speakers or a certain brand of speakers, and your amplifier is a certain amplifier, and a turntable is a certain turntable. And it was all about these, and staging the stereo field and all was really important, and people would have their cool stereos, and it was all about that. And then when CDs came along, it was even a higher fidelity because the source material was better than the vinyl. It was longer on a, you didn't have to flip it over on a side, it didn't crackle and pop. It was really wonderful. So then you had all this great fidelity, and then we decided, well, fidelity's really great, but it's okay if I just listen to it and a pair of cheesy headphones out of this iPad. And that came along kind of too because of the Walkman came along, and suddenly cassettes and mixtape cassettes were a big thing. Portability, now you could carry your music in your pocket and listen to it on headphones. And Sony was perfectly, talk about strategy, perfectly positioned to take over that market. They had bought some big record companies, EMI and some other ones. So they had the content, they had the Walkman, and then Napster came along. None of the record companies were making any money because it was all this piracy, and they were trying to figure out how can they get against piracy. Well, Jobs came along and made that little device, and it was just an MP3 recorder. There was a lot of them at that time, and then made the iTunes store so you could download the music in there. And the iTunes store, it's like 99 cents per song and maybe $10 for an album or something like that, right? And you download it into your iPod. And how they convinced everybody to pay 99 cents instead of getting it for free is still beyond me. But they said, consistency, and you're doing the right thing. And so he saved the music business and got the music companies to come on board with that. And so not only created the machine, but also created the content delivery system, the iTunes stores, so integral to that. So then made that, and that was a huge thing. It was like in 2002 or something, or huge. And then came out with the iPhone, right? And the iPhone came out in, it came out in June of 2007. So it's really only been a decade since, and think about that, and think about strategy. Think about BlackBerry at the time. BlackBerry dominated that market because they had the keypad, so you could do your text messaging with your phone, and that was huge. And everybody had a Crackberry, right? They called them, and everybody was like this on.
It's all about having email on your
and having email on your phone, yeah. And I remember
still use that.
the first time I went to a conference. It was in San Francisco when the those BlackBerries came out, and at the end of like one of the first sessions of the conference, everybody went out in the lobby and out on the street, and everybody was like this. I was like, that is the weirdest thing. I never saw that behavior before. Everybody was like this, and they were on their thing. And so then this came out, and it for a couple of years, BlackBerry didn't even were clueless, that a touchstone screen where you could change the screen every time and not have those hardwired buttons for it could be such a different way of interacting with this. Think about how quickly everybody adopted this. Everybody has a smartphone, pretty much. It's just remarkable. If you don't have a smartphone, you're really on the other side of that digital divide as far as what you can do. Because now you can cruise the web, and then the App Store, and all these apps can come down. And the beautiful thing about Apple is that these products really work. And if you have a problem with it, you can go to the Apple Store and have somebody tell you. If you buy like a Samsung phone or something, where are you going to go? To Verizon or to Walmart and say to the guys, hey, something's got. They don't have any clue about all this stuff. You go to Apple Store, they have the Genius Bar. You get set up with an appointment. Any question you have, they will answer it and fix it. And so having that support, and then they did this whole vertical integration thing. Before they did that, their retail, no one had that kind of retail. The whole model was that you and Samsung still does it all. You build a thing and then you sell it through, your third-party distributors, Best Buy or Walmart, or through Verizon or whatever else. And Apple said, no, we're going to go and make retail. Everybody thought they were crazy. And what did they do? It works on so many levels for them. One is they don't give up the margin from wholesale to retail, and that's about 40%. They capture that margin, and they also get, when we come in and have our questions or whatever, everybody's there with a little tablet, right? They put in what's the problem? Da, da, da. All that information gets fed back up, and then if they see that there's some sort of trend that people don't understand how to use this part, or this thing's failing or whatever, then they can go and fix it and address it, where the other companies don't get that knowledge upstream to them about their products. And what they did was they moved out of being a commodity in the phone business, basically, like all the Android ones are and all, where it's, they can't command a big profit margin. What they did was they positioned themselves as a luxury brand. Apple is a luxury brand. It's not a tech company as much as a luxury brand. It's more like Louis Vuitton or something like that. I mean, the Apple store is on Champs-Élysées.
It's a lifestyle. If you have like an iPhone, you probably gonna get Apple Watch or a MacBook and everything.
That's the other thing, is the whole ecosystem, and it all integrates together. And you can have all your music across all your platforms. You can have your photos across all your platforms, and they all go together. Yeah, I have a Mac and a tablet, and I have this, and I'm probably going to get the watch soon. I keep looking at it, saying, the new apps and all these like fitness apps and all this kind of cool stuff it can do. I kind of want it, and pretty soon. How can like Fitbit or any of these other, or Garmin or any of these other companies that are just like a watch company kind of compete when Apple has this incredible ecosystem of the App Store, and it can integrate and upstream all of your information from your phone into your computer, and so you can see what your heart rate's been for the last 6 months or what, all kinds of ridiculous stuff.
When you think about the fact that you're giving all of this information to somebody.
Well, that's the other thing, that quantified self, where you can, what gets measured gets managed, performance of as an individual, like, your sleeping patterns, all that kind of stuff. Today, there's a great podcast called The Daily. It's the New York Times podcast, Michael Barbaro. And today's one was on all the information, the geolocation information that people are getting. And they got, their reporters and, brilliant investigative journalists went and they got this data set and they started showing it to the people, and basically your phones track you, they have your life journey. It's everywhere you go, So they could, they could look at all these people in Manhattan, where they went, what they were doing. They looked at some people outside the governor's mansion, and they waited there. They must have been reporters. Waited there for like 6 hours, and then when then the dots started to move, and it tracked the the mayor's movements. And they're saying, they looked at nuclear power plants, and you could see the people leaving and going to their homes and stuff. So say if that information fell into nefarious hands, they could figure out and maybe get some night watchmen to do something, and now they could get in, hack into that system, or all that information is being tracked.
It's a new
to remarkable granularity.
marketing tool for stores. So
That's what it's about, basically, in the white hat way, or the good way, kind of. Because as there was some presentation where they were showing the people going around, and as they went around, every store would come up along the path. So, it could ding you and say, hey, you're in front of the McDonald's, we'll give you a Big Mac for 50 cents. Or, you're driving by the Payless, we'll do.
Stores set up now, or they're kind of testing some different stores where you can, let's say you're in Target, they can tell what products you're looking at, and even micro market to you with those products specifically, which is really interesting. I was reading an article about that a few days ago.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Amazon can do that now, right? Amazon does that because you're right online, and they know, and they take all that information about, what browser you come in, or, what time of day it is, and they price things dynamically, where the stores can't do that because they can't move the prices. Well, they could if they had that type of information back loop through your device. So yeah, it's amazing how much information. And And what they've been able to do, Facebook and the others, is to match up their information with all the other information about us from our debit cards and credit cards and browser history and everything, to make this incredible, accurate picture of us, more detailed than we even really know about ourselves, because then they use statistics to say that buyer behavior, whatever kind of behavior, goes in this kind of direction, and then they give us these kind of nudges to entice us in this way or that. It's really, really remarkable, and it's moving very rapidly. And now there's been this big backlash against it because of what presumably happened in the 2006 election and these other things, where all these Russian sources were just putting out misinformation and disinformation about various things, just to create havoc and and sow doubt and all kinds of crazy stuff. We're living in quite a time. So that whole vertically integrated Apple, that was a big strategy of theirs, all the way from they've bought the mines for the different metals that they need. They've designed their own chips now, so they're not relying on Intel and these other chips. They have really fast chips. They just design everything, and that's another thing, that they're so completely integrated. Like, you can't go in and hack so like geeky people that want to hot rod their computer system and buy a tower and put in this graphics card and this and that. You can't really do that with Apple. Apple is a sealed environment, which is great for a user who just wants to be able to go and use because they actually work, but it's not for everybody. Again, it's choice, and they decided to be completely vertically integrated right down to the retail stores. And their retail stores are incredible luxury retail kind of things. And that's why they can command the kind of premium pricing that they do, although they've been sort of running into those walls now, like their new iPhone X, iPhone 10s, people have been sort of not buying it because it's $1,000 or something like that. And it's like, well, my iPhone 7 is just fine, whatever, right? And but I think what's really going to come along is maybe their watch. There's been a lot of speculation too that they may acquire. Apple has about $250 billion in cash reserves. So they have a huge stockpile of cash that they've made, and a lot of their shareholders have been agitating for dividend that out to us, that you shouldn't be holding on to that. But one of the things that that's been talked about is they may acquire Tesla. And if they acquire Tesla, essentially Tesla is almost like an iPhone with wheels, right? I mean, one of the amazing things was about 2 years ago, they came out with their autopilot, and every time they do an upgrade, you don't have to go to the store and get new mechanical stuff. They just download that upgrade into your car, and they're doing that constantly, downloading braking upgrades and downloading steering upgrades and downloading autopilot upgrades. And so it's like an iPhone, where it's like, you have to get the latest iOS, version, and so it's basically a platform, computer platform that you drive around on. So it could really make sense for Apple to acquire them and then use their expertise in the app world and in retail and all that, and get into, and they've had autonomous car projects going on, like Google too, and so that may be where and so having all that dry powder, having all that money, allows them now to be opportunistic, because when things change and something happens, they can jump on it because they have the money to capitalize on that. And another nice thing about Apple, I think, is that, and because that geolocation data, I don't think Apple sells the geolocation data. Now, it may be that some of the apps that they allow, from the App Store, take your geolocation data, because every time we get an app or whatever, there's this whole, do you ever read those things? No one reads it, right? I just agree, right? And you go on, and it might say, we can use your data for anything we want.
Because when you're gonna do something in your iPhone, they always ask you if you wanna share your location or something like that. So
I always say no. Yeah, everyone wants to give you, right? A request to give you, and those requests now, they've only put those requests in recently because that's part of the European Union made some restrictions that demanded that they do that. So now they're telling you, this site uses cookies to track you, and this site would like to have your geolocation data to know where you are to make your experience more convenient, right? But with all and the big thing with all these services are, it's like 1984, one of those books, Brave New World, where surveillance was going, Big Brother's watching and all that kind of surveillance, and it seemed like so scary and all. We abdicated all those rights like nobody's business, right? Why? Because these services are free. And we wanted to have Gmail, and we wanted to have Facebook, and all these free services. And when the services are free, you're not the customer, you're the product. And we don't really think about that. And suddenly now we're starting to realize, like, they're using our data in these ways? How could they possibly be doing that?
Did you not notice?
Yeah, it's like, duh, did you think they were just assembling this?
It's private corporations that nobody really knows what's going on internally.
Well, exactly, yeah, like Cambridge Analytica and those kind of things too. And think about it in other countries too that maybe aren't as open as, in China, they watch that stuff, and you do any kind of text that is against the government or something, they're knocking on your door, So it has become an instrument for totalitarian, oppression as well. So there's a lot going on that we're not really ready to deal with, And we're just at the beginning of this, because right around this corner, technologically, when we're thinking about all these companies and thinking like leadership and thinking vision, is artificial intelligence, automation, robotics. Those things are rapidly developing along these exponential curves here. And before you know it, we're going to make things that we can't necessarily control. And that's happening already. There's all of these autonomous weaponry things that are really scary. I mean, there's control planes that go up and control drone swarms, not just one drone going but thousands of drones, like a colony of bees or something, going around doing, and they're all controlled computer. Think about the trading on the stock exchange. Most of that happens via computers. That's why that big drop the other day, they said that was algorithms that were triggered when there's a inversion of the yield curve, they sell off, and they just sold off, and it wasn't like, well, things are kind of good or anything like that. So all these kind of things are coming along. The AlphaGo, the beat the Go champion. Go is a game sort of like chess or checkers, but really has more permutations than chess. So it can't be programmed like Deep Blue, the IBM program, where they had all the chess moves and would go ahead and see which ones, and it could actually number crunch faster than a person, so it could figure out what were the optimal moves. Go has so many more permutations and combinations that it couldn't be done that way. So they have these learning programs, and it just beat the world champion, last summer, and they couldn't believe it. It did moves that no one would have thought of, and it was actually winning. And it actually learned, it's a learning program, and learned all of these techniques that are beyond what we couldn't program it to do these things. It had to learn them. And so that's really the first instance, in a way, of a computer program that knows more than any person does. And those things, I guarantee you, are going to start happening much faster. And there's a lot of concerns about artificial intelligence outpacing what we know and what we can control, and what that's going to mean. And as all these things start to happen, automation and autonomous vehicles, there's 2.5 million truck drivers in the United States. Once autonomous trucks take over in the next 10 years, or probably less, those people are going to be out of work. We're going to have mass disruptions of employment coming up soon, and those are other things we haven't thought about. And as we have, these technology things, there's these huge concentrations of power in the Facebooks and Google and Apple and Microsoft, and just a few companies. It's a winner-take-all type of scenario now. That is concerning. There's not a lot of mom and pop, kind of capabilities. Even for startups, startups, they get to a certain stage, and then these big companies acquire them and appropriate their technology or something. So all these things are, strategic thinking going on. I'll email you a copy of my book and some, I've got a bunch of PowerPoints and things, we'll go through them. But basically, I'm going to take this approach and we'll go through PowerPoints and stuff. But strategic thinking, strategic planning, strategic momentum managing, strategy, and then, this part here, measurement and learning and back to it. And emergent strategy and lean strategy and all that kind of stuff. So I'll talk to that in more detail. But I just wanted to give sort of an overview of what, what it is. It's not complicated, but it's really hard, Because it's hard to make those choices. It's hard to take the time to actually think about it. And this doesn't just go for companies. It goes for us in our life. When you think about what am I doing that I shouldn't do anymore, what am I not doing that I should be doing, and what could I do better, that is something that applies, It's taking some stock and doing some strategic thinking. I guess we all do, in a way. There's an informal strategic loop that we do each year, right? And this part here where you rethink and start planning out, what is that? What is that? New Year's resolutions, right? That's what I'm thinking of, You do your New Year's resolutions, and the people at the health club love that because that's when everybody comes in and puts down their membership, and then they bank on, January is the month where the gym's really crowded and stuff, and then by February it starts trickling up. By March, nobody's in the gym.
Hate yoga classes in January and February.
Because everybody's there, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, it's the New Year's resolution crowd. Yeah, exactly. And then, and then people don't. And then you have to think, what am I doing? Once you go through that 2 or 3 times, right? So what's the? You should realize, oh, you know what? I do that and then I don't go. Maybe I should try to figure out something at home or whatever. What's stopping me from doing it? How can I make it more fun or whatever? Instead of just keep doing the same thing over and over and dropping off. And the definition of insanity, right? Where you do the same thing over and over and expect different results. But there's lots of things like that, You should stop smoking or stop drinking or stop, eating pizza or, what can I do better this way or that way? And we all know those kind of things, I should read more and I should do this.
It's a personal version of
Yeah.
actually executing a plan, right? So
Exactly, right. And measurement,
you find
right?
success and you can execute and measure, but
And measurement might be, now we're getting into that quantitative self where we can measure our glucose levels and our heart rate and our sleep patterns and everything. But even just like a scale, that's like an important kind of measuring tool. They found that people that have a scale and use it are usually like 25% lighter than people that don't have a scale. There's all these kind of things that really, that kind of things can actually, work. You can start to, and there's habit loops that are similar to this kind of thing too. But yeah, it's all in the execution, right? Everyone knows the path, few are willing to walk it, or whatever kind of thing, right? Because you got all these great ideas, but I could just binge watch Netflix and, with a bag of Doritos and hope for the best.